A ceremony at the Oakville Museum to remember the tragic legacy of residential schools, honoring the Indigenous children who never came home. More than 139 residential schools operated in Canada between the 1800s and 1996. Many suffered traumatic abuse, with the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation saying more than 4,000 children died at the schools based on death records. Years later, Indigenous groups say mere acknowledgements of past wrongs are not enough.
I think that they have to give Indigenous people a real seat at the table, right? They have to, when they bring Indigenous people in to sit at a round table, say, that the city is having, they have to listen to them. And sometimes they just give us kind of like, you know, we're like the token. Oh, we've got the Indigenous people here, they're listening to us, but they're not acting on the words that we say. And maybe we do need to be more specific and say, we want this part of your museum, right? And we don't want to make a museum for Indigenous people. We're not a museum. We want to have a living space.
Oakville MP Anita Anand says the government remains committed to consultation with Indigenous communities.
When I was the Minister of National Defence and we were contemplating Arctic infrastructure for defence, that will not happen without consultation with our northern Indigenous peoples. It's that type of thing that we need to make sure happens as we go through the various recommendations of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report, but also to really ensure that we're respecting Indigenous ownership of land.
For its part, government has provided funding to revitalize near-extinct Indigenous languages, has settled long-standing legal disputes over child welfare reform, and also promised money to improve healthcare outcomes for Indigenous people. But Indigenous groups argue it's too little to reverse the intergenerational trauma.
They were not given land to share with people. They were put far away from everyone else. And so even in an urban Indigenous space like Oakville, where is the spot for Indigenous people? Right? Everybody's got a spot. The churches have a spot. The government has all of these museums and historical sites. Maybe we need to make space for Indigenous people.
Along the way, though, there's no doubt that Indigenous expression is fast emerging across Oakville's landscape. I'm Devin Murugan for Halton News.